So yeah, DevOps roller coaster. This talk is mostly a collection of things I have learned the hard way over the last year. So it will be a bit of a roller coaster. So I'm going to talk about kind of why is Nordstrom, why are enterprises doing CD DevOps very briefly. I think a lot of you already know why. Talk about why enterprise scale change is hard and why that's okay. One way Nordstrom is driving change, and then the lessons I've learned over the last year. So a little bit about me. I'm OpsRob on Twitter. I've worked for Bose, EMC, Accenture, and Nordstrom in various operations roles over the past 16 years. That includes things like Windows administration, Unix administration, VMware administration. At Accenture, I did consulting for large enterprises in helping them better run their SAN environments. Today, I'm a program manager for the infrastructure engineering team at Nordstrom. I am also supported by my awesome wife, Anne-Marie, who was able to make it today. She's a mechanical engineer and keeps me on the straight and narrow whenever I need help with my math, which is often. And I have a 15-month-old daughter, Lily, who is awesome as well. So that's about me. So why take the roller coaster ride? Why kind of go through some of the pain that you have to go through to change, to introduce DevOps and CD in the enterprise? So to start with, this is the Spruce Goose. It's the largest, it's an airplane with the largest wingspan of any plane ever. It's 5 stories tall. It's made entirely of wood. It's Howard Hughes' answer to the needs of transporting troop and material during World War II. This is going to sound a bit like a waterfall project. Design started in 1942. It made its one and only flight in 1947. So what happened during the time design started and this plane was built? 2 things. External factors changed, right? The war ended. And a highly disruptive technology took place, or was introduced, jet engines. So this took one flight. Before that flight, it was already obsolete. This can happen to any of us, no matter how long our enterprises have been around. Nordstrom's been around 113 years now. Very aware that we could be disrupted if we're not moving fast. So what's our answer to this? It's continuous delivery. It's all the practices that go into supporting continuous delivery, the DevOps mindset, the automation, and really trying to go as fast as we can so that we're the disruptors and not the disrupted. Having said that, changing an enterprise is hard, and that's okay. It's actually supposed to be hard. All right, so this is going to be a quick exercise in empathy. Your enterprise, your organization, is really truly accountable for repeatable and predictable performance to the leadership in your company, to your stockholders, to your customers. When they step on the gas, they expect a very predictable result. This generally means the organization optimizes for incremental change, right? So we're going to make small changes, small tweaks to become more efficient. What we're not going to do is some large change that forces us to jump the rails here, right? So your organization is what we can call a performance engine. It's been tuned to go down those tracks and be reliable about it. It's probably been going down those same tracks for a very long time. And getting it to switch or jump those tracks is hard. And really, we want it to be hard because jumping that track, that might jeopardize how you deliver, right? Your customer will be impacted, your stockholders will be impacted. So you need to be very thoughtful when you do try to disrupt that performance engine. To make things even harder, that engine has probably tried a change in the past, and it has a very long memory. It probably didn't go so well. And this may look familiar to some of you. We'll cruise through this quick. Here's an example, right? 1964, Ford releases the Mustang, one of my favorite classic cars. They could not make enough of these, right? Very successful. They're not going to, the next year, totally revolutionize the design, right? They're going to optimize themselves for incremental change. 1968, still recognizable. Now, external factors came into play, the gas crisis. And Ford is like, okay, we need to make a more fuel-efficient car. We're going to drastically change how we do things. Everyone's on board. They get it. You go through change management, and you end up with this, which is, yeah, not my favorite car, right? The memory of this stays with your organization a lot longer than you might think. It takes a lot to recover from this. And so the next time someone comes with their idea for a big change, they're going to be skeptical, and it's good to be skeptical. Innovation may very well signify the future, but the performance engine is the proven foundation, and if it crumbles, there is no future. This is from the other side of innovation. What this is saying is that no matter how badly you need to change and do a drastic change, if you tamper with that performance engine, that core of your company, too much, too quickly, you will go out of business, right? You need that to fund your operations, to fund your change. You need to do your change off to the side. So how do we change? To that, we're going to look to science and corn. All right. So back in 1957, Iowa State University did a study. They wanted to know, how come some farmers are adopting the awesomeness that is hybrid corn? I don't know how awesome that is, but in 57, they thought it was awesome. And how come some are not? And so they did a study. Joe Bolin, George Beal, and Everett Rogers. And what they found was pretty interesting. They found that within the group of farmers, they had innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, in a pretty even curve there. What they discovered was the innovators and the early adopters, the people embracing hybrid corn the quickest, they were leaders in their community. They had very large farms. They were risk takers, very open to new ideas. Early majority, they were active in the communities, their local communities, not necessarily leaders though. Late majority, much less active in the community, much smaller farms, much more conservative. Laggards, even more so. What Rogers discovered was that this curve is actually can be generalized across most populations, most organizations. So in your organization, a small percentage is set up for success with DevOps, with CD, and making that transition, the innovators and the early adopters. You then have this chasm that you have to cross to get early majority, late majority. But once you do cross that, you end up with this S-curve of very escalating or rapidly escalating adoption. So what does this mean? What does this tell us? It tells us that you really, really want to focus on just the early adopters at first. Get the early adopters to show the benefits and share the benefits. The early majority will not adopt until they see the success of their friends and actually know someone who has done it. Right? So this is in your org, people need to see the project be successful. They need to see what it took to do it. They need to see what's in it for them. Otherwise, they will not adopt it. The late majority will then come on board after the early majority, right? You don't have to try to sell the late majority. They will come on board out of fear. The laggards may never come on board, but that is a small percentage that you can deal with later. It seems we're still rediscovering science. So a couple weeks ago, I saw this article. The latest Gallup figures show that half the workforce considers itself disengaged, 1 out of 5 actively disengaged. And then there's this blog post on Forbes doing some hand-wringing saying, you know, if only leadership was more innovative, more risk takers, and really focused on those disengaged people, wow, your company would be awesome. I don't buy that necessarily. If you look, it matches up pretty closely to that adoption curve. The disengaged and the actively disengaged match up with the late majority and the laggards. My suggestion and what we have done is focus on the early adopters, create a team of early adopters, and go after your change, even if that is not the biggest business value area. It's very possible the late majority has the most value. It will be so difficult to implement change there without first checking off the early adopters and the early majority. So how are we approaching this? What we've done is created teams of early adopters, put them off to the side, and given them some challenges to overcome. And we've been very public about, within Nordstrom, about what those challenges are, how we're solving them, and the successes we're seeing. So what does this look like for real, right? We've formed a team to demonstrate continuous delivery on a piece of our website. It was not the most important part of our website. In fact, it was the least important, but it was a piece we could carve off and show success with. We cherry-picked a team from different parts of the organization. I chose some developers, and how did I choose the developers? I kept my ear out for the ones that were most vocal about wanting change. A little bit disgruntled, a little bit angry about having to follow our process, brought them into the team. Brought in a QA tester to help, not to do tests, but to help mentor us on how to do testing. A sysadmin, picked 2 sysadmins who were good at empowering teams and empowering developers, not wanting to control and hug servers. We chose a Scrum Master and ran this as a truly agile project, not Scrumfall. And I intentionally picked a new and experienced Scrum Master because a lot of our Scrum Masters, and I expect in other enterprises this could be the same, have been a little bit subjected to Scrum fall, right? And I didn't want to perpetuate that. This is airing a little bit of dirty laundry. And then product owner is something our operations teams have never had before, and so that was new to us, but was valuable. It helps set direction. In all, create this team kind of off to the side and focus on creating a team that has a minimal amount of external dependencies. You don't want to disrupt that performance engine. That is your organization doing day-to-day work. Great. It turns out forming these teams is kind of hard, and we ran into some challenges. The first challenge, empowerment. Now, we know we want these teams to be empowered, right? We know that being very directive may be faster at first, but you quickly become the bottleneck and you lose creativity. So we took this formed team and said, hey, look, you're empowered, go figure out CD. It didn't work out quite as I had hoped at the beginning. There was a lot of churn. Ben Grossman-Kahn from our People Innovation Lab is like, Rob, you got to check out this Goats and Fences video. So if you've seen Michael Ducey talk, he talks about goats and silos. This is a little bit about teams, so it's goats and fences. And it applies pretty well. Goats look for opportunity. So you can ask Nathan this when he's on the farm, what are goats doing? If they're in a fence, they're out exploring. They're looking for a hole in that fence so they can go check out the woods. This is your project. Well, they found that hole, and suddenly they're wandering around. They're out eating grass on the hills, climbing mountains, doing all sorts of really awesome things for a goat. Not at all related to your project, though, right? You're not getting your project done. Okay. So we've made the fence solid. These are the boundaries you will work on. We wanted them to be empowered, so we made a big fence. Well, that just meant they kept exploring this really large fence. Start small. Create a small fence, define what they need to do, and then grow the fence. So what does this look like in real life? When they started, they just didn't even know where to begin, right? There's a lot of churn, totally normal, totally my fault. So what we did was kind of reset and created a fence. We said, okay, let's focus on tools to begin with, just because they're fun. People can, touch and feel them. And said, okay, let's use Git for source control and not worry about anything else. Let's use Chef for config management. We already have it. We know it'll work. Now, for your CI/CD tool set, you go out, research what you want, come back with a recommendation, and we'll implement it. Well, they know I'm a huge open source fan and had a preference for Jenkins, and we already had quite a bit of Jenkins installed at Nordstrom, still do. So 2 weeks later, they were kind of nervous, right? They didn't really believe that they were empowered. They didn't really believe that some architecture committee wasn't going to come down and lay down the law, right? They didn't have that trust. So they kind of tiptoed in and said, Rob, we'd really like to use Go, ThoughtWorks Go. And I said, great, we'll buy it, let's go, move on. And they're like, really? And so that gained some trust, and we were able to then grow the fence over our next set of stories, and the team is now highly empowered and highly successful. The joke ended up being on them by the end of the project, though. Go was open source, so got my way anyway. All right, next challenge, the stink. All right, this is from Excited to Not. I saw this happen with 3 different teams, and I read about it happening in other places. I'm going to call it out because you need to know about this. There will be hard times in your project no matter how awesome and how righteous it is. You're going to start out super excited. We are going to change the world. It's going to be awesome. We can't go wrong. And then reality will hit, and you will quickly find yourself in the stink. And this is where the grit and the determination and just small steps forward is so important. I'm pretty convinced you can't avoid the stink. This is like the squalls that Justin was talking about in the keynote earlier. It's going to happen. You just have to know it's going to happen, make sure the team knows it's going to happen, remind them when it's happening that you knew this was going to happen, and tiptoe through it, or small steps forward. So what's this look like in real life? We chose on the CD team again, we had our tool train built, great, now we need to actually do stuff. We're really excited, we're going to build, it's going to be awesome. Well, they started, I should go back and explain. These were .NET developers who we had shielded from operations, right? This is old school enterprise. Like, developers, you just code, don't worry about servers, don't worry about load balancers, don't worry about any of this, we'll take care of it. And now suddenly they're empowered, they own it all, Go. So like, all right, we'll learn Chef. Well, Chef is not, and Ruby is not .NET at all, right? .NET, very documented, very long established, they were very comfortable with it, and now they're learning Chef and Ruby, which at the time had a pretty steep learning curve. They got depressed, and they got angry and frustrated, right? So, and to the point that it was actually causing problems with some of the other teams that were already using Chef and loving it. So I focused them on just like, let's just get through the next week. We're going to finish all the Chef work, and then we'll be fine. We'll be moving on to .NET coding. I kind of knew that wasn't true, but we did it anyway. Got them through it, and something funny happened. They got through that learning curve. And then they came on their next challenge. Oh, we have to automate the provisioning of a load balancer. They chose to use Chef to do it. And suddenly, we're really enjoying Chef and helping our other Chef teams even in how they were utilizing the tool. So it was pretty awesome. We got through the stink. So bias. I don't know that as a community we talk enough about biases. And for me, this is one that I worked on quite a bit this year, and I've been super guilty of it in the past. It's the fundamental attribution error. So this is people's tendency to place undue emphasis on internal characteristics to explain someone else's behavior in a given situation, rather than considering external factors. So the kind of generic Wikipedia common example is driving down the highway, someone cuts me off, oh, that driver's a jerk. The driver's not a jerk. You've done the same thing before. I've done the same thing before. There is some external factor where it made sense at the time for the driver to make that decision. When you're in the stink, when you're kind of in the heat of that adoption curve, going after the late majority and the laggards, it's going to be super simple to get frustrated and say, well, that person's a laggard, right? Like that individual, there's something wrong with that individual. Usually not the case. Almost always an external factor. Sharpen your empathy skills, figure out what that is, and address that external factor. Amazing things will happen. We had an engineer, awesome engineer, and we kind of changed the situation he was in a little bit, and just, it was amazing. It's one of, if not our top Chef contributor. So it was external factors that was holding him back, not him as an individual. So I have some homework. These are the books I read, and I'll post this, I guess I'll send a link on Twitter. But these are the books that influenced me over the last year. Highly recommend them. The first two, Just Culture and the Efficiency Thoroughness Trade-off Principle, are all about creating safety in your organization and safety around being able to talk about failure in a safe way. Really important when you're doing this. The Phoenix Project, I think everyone's familiar with by now. Give that book to your boss, give it to your CIO. I get kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome when I read the first half of it. I've lived through too much of it. I know what's going to happen. Fearless is great. It is all about patterns around change. So if you're new to changing an organization, this book is money. It is all research-based. Every single pattern has research behind it and science behind it. And it goes on, it talks about things from the adoption curve. It talks about bring cookies to a meeting and you will get your way more often. There's actual science behind it. It's amazing. The other side of innovation, solving the execution challenge, is how do you form teams to adopt innovation and then inject that into your performance engine. Crucial Conversations and Switch is all about how to talk about anything and how to really understand what external factors might be in play. Really good books. So quick summary, and then we'll move on to some questions, is so large organizations trained to resist large, rapid change. That's okay. Focus on early adopters at the beginning, even if that's not the highest business value. Build full stack teams off to the side for rapid change, and then diffuse that back into the organization. Empowering teams, especially if they don't come from an empowered environment, takes quite a bit of leadership work. Don't just say it and hope it happens. There will be rough times in your awesome project. Be ready for it. That's about all you can do on that one. Watch for bias, especially the fundamental attribution error when times are rough. So that is what I learned in the last year in a nutshell. Are there any questions?
So my question is with the small teams that you're setting aside early on, how did you work with a lot of the legacy, like all the bureaucracy that you have to deal with in those teams, like to actually empower those teams? Because there's a lot of times that there's a ton of paperwork and just bureaucracy involved in getting things going.
Yep. So, and that is still true at Nordstrom in a lot of cases. What we did was we formed the teams and we put kind of engineers in there that had a lot of connections throughout our organization already, and were able to kind of use their network to get things done when we needed to. That's how we did it. This is not something where you can bring in people from the outside and do, right? It's got to be people within your org that are connected. Short of that, you also need leadership buy-in. And then even if you don't have that, I would default to do the right thing. If you get fired for it, that's not a company you want to work for anyway. Oh, sorry, and the question, oh, yeah, go ahead. Questions?
So you mentioned that adoption curve, right? You
Yep.
have like the laggers and the late
Yeah.
maturity or whatever. What of those people should be encouraged to move on from the organization, assuming you have the ability to do it?
Right. So who should be,
Trying to say it a nice way, yeah. Who gets fired, right?
Right, who gets fired, who gets managed out. Yep, so you will totally come across people that will, may want to make the change and can't. You will, I would say, right, we'll find something, yeah, so if they want to make the change and can't, we will find something for them. Look at the external factors that person is under and make sure there's not some reason they're behaving the way they are. I would really check that out. And then, if they're a laggard and they're actively resisting and it's becoming toxic, and they're blocking kind of the early adopters from doing the work they need to do, then yeah, you need to have those discussions. Crucial Conversations comes in really handy because you can talk about anything to anyone. Yep, you got to talk though.
I read another book. It was called The No Asshole Rule. It's written by Sutton. And in my last couple of jobs I've run into those kinds of characters where, yes, perhaps it was external factors that led to some of their behavior. But, for example, in my current environment, there is a guy on the ops side, and we're in management silos, so you go up about 3 or 4 levels of management before you get over to somebody who is responsible for both of our teams. And this guy has a very different opinion about how DevOps or operations management should happen. And he is the most outspoken in the meetings, creates huge problems. I would love some advice on how to, other than just closing my ears and trying to avoid having his toxic effects cause morale problems in my team.
Yeah.
Because we are about 10 or 12 of us. He's got about 5 of him.
Yeah, I think that's more common than we would like. And I get highly frustrated by that. If you have no direct influence over that person or that organization and you can't talk to leadership, for that, I fall back to Jesse Robbins' rule of don't fight stupid. And so close your ears, and just do the right thing and demonstrate that what you're doing is right. I will still today find myself fighting stupid and have to back away from that. I don't have a good advice for that.
What I did is you steal them at the grassroots, though. You steal them at the grassroots, right? So if you have people reporting to that person, they'll get it, right? And you go to them directly. And sooner or later, they either get on the boat or they go work in a different group or something, and it happens.
Yeah. Yep. It's uncomfortable, right? You got to have these conversations, and you can't, people have to know that, hey, this person's being, right? Anything else?
So shifting gears a little bit, you talked about building out this silo and really equipping yourselves with this tactical team to start driving change. What are the indicators for you when you move that out of the silo and try to get that into the homogenized land of your business?
Yep. So that team was put off to the side. One of the things we did that was it ended up being a great idea is we held technology all demos open to our entire technology team. We packed that room with 100 or 130 people for every demo from all over our organization. And what started happening towards the end of that is we identified who the early majority was going to be because they came to us and said, we really want that, right? It also helped us identify who the late majority and the laggards were because they were the most vocal resisting it, right? But having that very open discussion of this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, will actually uncover who that early majority is going to be that helps you cross the chasm. I started getting a backlog of teams to help. Did that answer your question? Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Any others? So I cannot be here tomorrow, but from my team, Kevin Mosier, who wrote Chef Vault, is going to be in the community room at 2, and he has been a part of all this. He can also help with, we run Chef on Windows, and I know there's quite a bit of interest on that. He can answer any technical questions around that also. So you can hit me up on Twitter or email me as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks.